The desert winds moved across the camp like whispered secrets, carrying with them the scent of dust, metal, and heat. A boy of 8 lingered at the edge of the tents, watching the pale-robed figures move about with solemn efficiency. They were not his people, not exactly, but he had lived among them long enough to know their patterns, the way they glanced at the horizon as though expecting it to deliver both salvation and ruin. His gaze settled on one figure who seemed unlike all the rest. She stood taller than those around her, radiant even in the harsh sun, her garments gleaming with gold thread that caught the light like flame. A crown, or something very like it, rested upon her head, an intricate lattice of metal that curved into sharp points like sun rays frozen in steel. She did not move with the weary pace of the others. Her steps were measured, deliberate, and yet heavy, as if each one cost her a portion of strength she no longer wished to spend. The boy stared openly, unable to contain his curiosity. She noticed him, of course. It was impossible not to. Her eyes, a color caught between silver and amber, softened when they landed on him. She crouched down, lowering her regal bearing to his level, and for the first time he saw past the crown and the jewels into the sorrow that clung to her features. "You watch me," she said, her voice low and resonant, carrying an accent that turned every word into a melody. He hesitated, clutching the frayed hem of his tunic. "You look different," he admitted. That drew the faintest smile from her lips. Different can be dangerous. Or lonely. She paused, tilting her head as though weighing whether to continue. "Do you know what it is to be lonely, child?" He considered this seriously, in the way children do. His parents had been gone for some time now, lost to battles he only half understood. The camp gave him food, shelter, and the occasional kind word, but no one had filled the silence left behind. "Yes," he said at last, his voice thin but certain. Her expression softened further, and she reached out, brushing a strand of golden hair from her face. "Then perhaps you understand more than most." They remained like that for a time, studying each other with the unguarded honesty of those who had nothing else to lose. At last, the boy shifted closer. "Why are you sad?" he asked. A long silence followed. She looked away toward the horizon, where the sun blazed down upon dunes that stretched endlessly. "Because my people have no home," she answered. "And I was meant to lead them somewhere brighter. Yet here we are, drifting, hiding, waiting." She gave a brittle laugh that did not reach her eyes. A queen without a throne, a promise without a future. The boy's brow furrowed. He did not understand the complexities of exile, of kingdoms and politics, but he understood sadness. He understood broken promises. He wanted to fix it, to mend what seemed beyond repair. His small hand balled into a fist, as though the strength of his determination alone might matter. "Then I'll help you," he said firmly. She blinked, taken aback by the seriousness in his tone. "And how will you do that?" "I'll marry you when I grow up," he declared, as though the solution were the simplest truth in the universe. "Then you won't be lonely anymore. And I'll build you a home." For a heartbeat, silence reigned. Then, to his surprise, she laughed, a clear, melodic sound that drew curious glances from the nearby tents. Yet it was not mockery. It was astonishment mingled with a fragile kind of joy. She covered her mouth with her hand, but her eyes shone with sudden warmth. "You would do that for me?" He nodded fiercely. "I promise." The word hung in the air between them, heavier than either expected. Slowly, the queen reached into the folds of her gown and drew forth a small object. It was a pendant, carved from crystal, that shimmered faintly as though a star had been caught inside. She held it out to him, and he accepted it reverently, his small fingers brushing against hers. "In my people's tradition," she said softly, "such a gift is not given lightly. It is a vow, a bond. If you keep it, then your promise is remembered." He clutched the pendant tightly, already sensing its weight was more than physical. "I'll keep it," he swore. Her smile faded into something more solemn, though her eyes remained gentle. "Then perhaps the universe has heard you." A shout rang out across the camp, urgent and sharp. Soldiers in white and gold armor hurried through the rows of tents, speaking in clipped tones. The queen's expression shifted instantly, the warmth replaced with wary command. She rose gracefully, towering once more above the boy. "It seems our time is short," she said. Her hand lingered briefly atop his head, a final gesture of connection. "Remember, little one, promises shape the paths we walk, even when the world tries to pull us away." He opened his mouth to ask if she would stay, but the words never left him. Already she was moving, her robes sweeping behind her as she disappeared into the growing chaos. He stood frozen, the pendant cool and bright in his palm, watching until she was gone. That night, the camp burned with hurried preparation. Ships rose into the sky, engines screaming against the silence of the stars. The boy clutched the crystal as he crouched among crates, knowing without being told that she was leaving, that she would be carried beyond his reach. He wanted to run to her, to remind her of the promise, but his feet refused to move. Fear, awe, and the crushing weight of inevitability pinned him down. When the last ship vanished into the darkness, he remained alone beneath the stars. The desert wind carried away the last echoes of her presence, leaving only the token clutched to his chest. He laid down in the sand, exhausted but unwilling to let go, the words still echoing in his mind. "I'll marry you when I grow up." He whispered them again into the empty night, as though the universe itself might carry them to her. And though he did not yet understand how or when, he knew with the unshakable certainty of childhood that he would keep his promise. The years stretched like shadows across a barren plain, and the boy was no longer a boy. Time had pressed him into the shape of a young man, his frame hardened by labor, his eyes sharpened by loss, and his heart marked by the memory of a promise he could not forget. The pendant remained with him always, a glimmering fragment of another world, worn against his chest beneath his uniform. When comrades teased him for it, he merely smiled and tucked it away again, never offering an explanation. It was not theirs to understand. The galaxy around him had grown turbulent, a restless sea of factions vying for dominance. Human colonies expanded into the stars, encountering new civilizations, some friendly, many hostile. Amid these shifting tides, the young man enlisted with the fleet, not out of patriotism or ambition, but because training gave shape to his days and battles gave purpose to his nights. More than once, he questioned whether his childhood vow had been nothing more than a child's dream, yet every time doubt whispered, the crystal pendant in his hand whispered louder. He rose quickly through the ranks, not because he sought glory, but because he possessed a quiet determination others could not ignore. He volunteered for missions few dared attempt. In one, he led a fractured unit through the wreckage of a derelict space station, guiding them to safety when enemy forces closed in. His superiors praised his courage, yet in the quiet of his bunk he thought only of the woman with the crown of gold and the sorrow in her eyes. Each victory, each narrow survival, seemed like a step toward becoming someone worthy of standing before her again. Whispers of her people drifted through military channels like fragments of forgotten songs. They were said to wander still, a displaced race scattered across the stars, bound together by pride and tragedy. Rumor painted them as both noble and dangerous, wielders of ancient knowledge that frightened even seasoned diplomats. The young man listened carefully whenever such whispers arose, but no one ever spoke her name. It was as though she existed only in the private world of his memory. One night, after a campaign that left his uniform scorched and his hands bloodied, he sat alone in the hangar, staring at the stars beyond the open bay doors. He imagined her somewhere among them, still searching, still enduring. The thought struck him with sudden force. She might believe he had forgotten. He clenched his fists, vowing silently that she would know, one day, that he had not. His comrades sometimes asked why he pushed himself so relentlessly. They thought he was driven by ambition, perhaps a hunger for command. He never corrected them. How could he explain that every scar he bore, every discipline he mastered, was in preparation for a reunion most would call impossible? To them, the promise of an 8-year-old would seem laughable. To him, it was the axis upon which his entire life turned. Years passed, marked by campaigns, treaties, and endless training. The boy within him faded, but the promise remained, shaping him more than he realized. He grew into a man of steady composure, the kind whose presence could steady a faltering squad, whose gaze carried both weight and assurance. Yet beneath the layers of discipline, a quieter yearning persisted, unshaken by time. Then came the turning point. He was stationed aboard a reconnaissance vessel tasked with mapping trade routes through contested sectors. In a briefing, a diplomat mentioned a fleet of exiles sighted near the rim, a people adorned in gold, bearing technology centuries old. The words fell like sparks into dry tinder. Though no name was given, he felt certainty ignite within him. It had to be them. It had to be her. That night, he retrieved the pendant from beneath his collar and held it in the dim glow of his quarters. The crystal shimmered faintly, as though responding to his unspoken thoughts. "I will find you," he murmured. The words echoed softly in the small room, a vow renewed. But finding her would not be simple. Duty chained him to the fleet, to orders he could not abandon without consequence. To leave was to risk everything he had built, his standing, his honor, his freedom. Yet the thought of hesitation curdled within him. What worth was honor if it came at the cost of a promise unfulfilled? In the following weeks, his restlessness grew. Each mission completed felt hollow. Each order obeyed a delay he could no longer justify. He began to see every skirmish, every negotiation, as noise that pulled him further from his true path. The tension wore at him until the decision became inevitable. He would leave. He would find her. The choice was made one quiet evening as the vessel drifted between systems, its crew distracted with routine repairs. He packed lightly, rations, a sidearm, a map of star charts, half smuggled from the archives. The pendant he placed at the center of his chest plate, no longer hidden, but displayed openly, as if announcing to the cosmos itself the vow it represented. He left without ceremony, boarding a small scout craft under cover of maintenance. As the engines roared to life and the stars stretched before him, he felt both fear and exhilaration. Fear, because he had cut himself loose from all that was familiar. Exhilaration, because for the first time since boyhood, his path led directly toward her. The void embraced him, endless and vast, yet no longer empty. Every glimmer of starlight seemed a signpost guiding him forward. Every silence, an echo of her laughter. He knew the journey ahead would test him beyond the battles he had already fought. He knew there would be doubt, danger, and perhaps heartbreak. But he also knew this. The boy who had once stood in a desert and promised a lonely queen that he would marry her when he grew up had not been lying. The man who now cut through the void with fire in his engines and a vow in his chest was living proof of it. The voyage carried him through the forgotten corners of the galaxy, where maps frayed and records failed. He pursued rumors like a pilgrim chasing fragments of scripture, following whispers of exiled caravans and sightings of ships adorned with gold. Each trail demanded more of him, fuel, time, and resolve, but he pressed forward, guided by the weight of the pendant and the promise bound to it. Loneliness gnawed at him in the quiet of the cockpit, yet in that solitude he found clarity. Every hardship he endured brought him closer. Each obstacle sharpened the truth. He had not come this far to falter. At last, fortune, or perhaps fate, answered. In a remote sector, he intercepted transmissions encrypted in an ancient dialect. With painstaking care, he deciphered enough to trace their origin to a drifting armada hidden among asteroid belts. The fleet shimmered with faint light as his craft approached. Towering vessels etched with sigils, their golden hulls worn by years of exile, yet still radiant. For a long moment, he hovered in silence, staring at the sight he had imagined countless times. His chest tightened. Somewhere within those ships, she lived. Permission to dock was not easily given. Suspicion crackled across the comms as guards demanded his purpose. He spoke plainly. He had come to deliver a promise. His words drew laughter, disbelief, and finally a grudging command to stand down until a decision was made. Hours passed in tense waiting, the kind that stretched a heartbeat into eternity. Then, astonishingly, he was summoned. He stepped into the grand hall of their central vessel, where golden banners swayed and the air was thick with the weight of history. At its far end stood the queen. Time had traced delicate lines upon her face, yet she remained luminous, her bearing regal and unyielding. The crown she wore was simple now, a circlet of tempered gold, as though exile had stripped away ornament but left her essence intact. She regarded him with a measured gaze, eyes narrowing slightly in recognition. "You," she whispered, the word carrying disbelief. He dropped to one knee, lowering his head in reverence. From his chest plate he lifted the pendant she had once given him, its light glimmering against the hall's dim glow. "I told you I would return," he said. His voice, steadier than he felt, filled the chamber. Gasps rippled among her counselors, yet the queen silenced them with a single raised hand. Her gaze remained fixed on him, searching his features, as though to uncover the child she had once known. "That promise," she murmured, her tone half wonder, half warning. "I thought it a kindness, spoken by a boy who could not know what he was saying." "I knew enough," he replied, rising slowly to meet her eyes. "I knew you were alone. I knew you carried sorrow no child could mend. I swore I would grow strong enough to stand beside you. And I have." She studied him in silence, her expression unreadable. The hall seemed to hold its breath. He reached into a satchel and withdrew a small object, a ring forged from tempered steel and inlaid with a shard of crystal that echoed the glow of her pendant. He held it out with trembling hands. "In my people's tradition," he said softly, "a ring is a bond, a pledge of union. I offer this alongside the token you gave me. You said promises shape the paths we walk. This is the path I have chosen, to fulfill the vow I made to you." The hall erupted in whispers, some mocking, others astonished. To them, the proposal of a human soldier to their queen was either insult or madness. Yet the queen's gaze never wavered. She looked at the ring, then at him, as though weighing the gravity of centuries against the sincerity of a single man. "Do you know what you ask?" she said at last, her voice cool, though her eyes flickered with something deeper. "To stand at my side is not merely to ease loneliness. It is to shoulder exile, to carry the burden of a people scarred in wandering. It is to bind yourself not to a woman, but to a crown that has cost me everything." He met her gaze without faltering. "Then let me carry it with you. I have fought battles, endured trials, but none have weighed on me as heavily as the thought of leaving you alone. My life has been nothing but preparation for this moment. If exile is the price, I will pay it. If burden is the weight, I will share it." For the first time, her composure cracked. A flicker of vulnerability crossed her face, swiftly masked but unmistakable. She turned away, walking toward the grand windows that overlooked the drifting fleet. Her voice, when it came, was softer. "For years, I told myself that boy was a dream I had imagined in a moment of weakness, that no one would return, and yet here you stand." He stepped forward, careful not to break the fragile stillness. "I am no dream," he said. "I am the boy who kept his word." The hall waited, tense with expectation. The queen's fingers brushed the cold glass of the window as she stared out at her people. Doubt, duty, and desire warred visibly within her. Finally, she turned back, her gaze locking with his, luminous with both sorrow and wonder. "You would give me your hand," she said slowly, "and your future, despite all that stands against us?" He held out the ring once more, without hesitation. The silence stretched, unbearable and absolute. Then she stepped closer, her hand hovering above his. The chamber rustled with disbelief, outrage, hope. She did not take the ring yet, but her hand rested lightly over his, closing around the pendant that lay between them. "I must think," she said, her voice low but steady. "This choice is not mine alone. It binds a people as much as it binds two hearts. But know this, you have shaken certainties I thought unshakable." It was not acceptance, nor was it refusal. It was a door half open, a promise that the story was not yet finished. He bowed his head, his heart pounding, knowing he had come farther than he ever dreamed, and that the final answer still lay ahead. The queen did not summon him for 3 days. In that time he wandered the corridors of the great vessel, bearing the weight of countless stares. Some looked upon him with hostility, others with suspicion, and a few with a flicker of curiosity that bordered on admiration. He endured it silently, knowing that the true judgment rested not with them, but with the woman whose silence haunted him. At night, he lay awake in his quarters, the pendant warm against his skin, wondering if the boy he once was had asked too much of a woman who carried an entire people on her shoulders. On the fourth evening, the summons came. He was escorted to a chamber unlike the grand hall of their first meeting. This one was smaller, lined with relics, carved staves, ancient banners, and fragments of stone inscribed with words in a language older than his species. She stood waiting at the center, her crown absent, her robes simpler than before. She looked less a queen than a woman, worn, proud, but no longer alone. "I have spoken with my council," she began, her voice steady though her eyes betrayed sleepless nights. "They see folly in your words. They see danger in binding our destiny to yours. They tell me to dismiss you, to return you to your kind and forget the vow of a child." She paused, taking a breath as though preparing to leap from a precipice. "But I cannot, because I have seen the truth in your eyes, and truth weighs more than counsel." He stepped closer, careful, as though the air between them might fracture. "Then you will accept?" Her lips curved into something not quite a smile. "I will not lie to you. This will not be simple. To take you at my side will bring resistance, even rebellion. You will not be welcomed by all. But if you mean to share my burden, then yes, I will accept your hand." The words struck him harder than any blow he had taken in battle. For a moment he could not breathe. Then he reached for her, his hand trembling as he slid the ring onto her finger. It was plain compared to the splendor of her jewels, but it fit as though it had been forged for this very moment. She looked down at it, the crystal catching the chamber's light, and at last allowed herself a true smile. The wedding was not held in secret. She would not hide what she had chosen. The hall filled with her people, banners unfurled, the air electric with both dissent and hope. He stood beside her in ceremonial garb offered by her attendants, though he kept the pendant upon his chest, the first bond between them. When their hands were joined before the assembly, there were cries of outrage, but there were cheers as well. The queen's voice rang out, steady and clear, declaring not just her acceptance of him, but her intent to unite her people's fate with his. In that moment, something shifted. For years, her people had drifted without anchor, guided by a queen they loved but feared was fading. Now they saw her choosing not despair, but renewal. And though many doubted, they also saw that doubt itself had been shaken. Later, in the quiet of her private chambers, she removed her crown and set it aside. "You understand what you've done," she murmured. "I've done what I promised," he replied. She touched the pendant at his chest, the crystal warm against her fingers. A child's promise, carried across years, has altered the course of nations. Do you realize how rare that is? He thought of deserts, of battles, of empty nights staring at the stars. He thought of the boy who had spoken words he could barely understand. "Rare or not," he said softly, "it is ours." Time passed, and the bond between them grew not as legend, but as daily truth. He learned her language, her customs, her people's ways of mourning and celebration. She, in turn, learned his stubborn humanity, the humor that softened his resolve, the fierce loyalty that made him fearless. Together they faced resistance from within and threats from beyond, but their union became a symbol, a story retold in marketplaces and whispered in starports. The queen who had accepted the vow of a human, and the soldier who had returned with a ring. The pendant and the ring became twin emblems of their reign, displayed during ceremonies as proof that love and loyalty could transcend the boundaries of worlds. Their marriage did not erase exile, but it transformed it. Her people, once drifting, found in their bond a new identity, not merely survivors of loss, but builders of a shared future. And in quiet moments, when the duties of crown and command fell away, she would lean against him and remember the desert, the child who had looked at her sorrow and answered with courage. He would remind her, half smiling, "I told you I'd marry you when I grew up." Her laughter, once brittle and burdened, came freely then. "And you did," she would answer. The universe continued in its chaos. Wars raged, empires rose and fell, but amid it all stood their union, improbable yet enduring. To those who doubted, it was an anomaly. To those who believed, it was proof that promises, once spoken with sincerity, could outlast time itself. Years later, when chroniclers recorded their reign, they did not begin with treaties or battles. They began with a boy in a desert, a lonely queen, and a promise spoken beneath a blazing sky. For it was in that moment, fragile and unassuming, that a future was born. And as he stood beside her on the balcony of their flagship, watching stars scatter like jewels across the void, he thought of the boy he had been, whispering his vow into the empty night. The boy had kept his word. The man had fulfilled it. And together, they had turned a child's promise into a legacy. The years of uneasy peace did not pass without shadows. Beyond the borders of their shared dominion, rival factions had watched the Queen's union with a human as both a curiosity and a provocation. For some, it was an affront to tradition, a weakness to be exploited. For others, it was a beacon that threatened their grip on power. Whispers grew into conspiracies, and soon enough, hostile envoys and saboteurs moved through the outer colonies like poison in the bloodstream. The Queen, though steadfast, carried the weight of these threats with a familiar heaviness. She had known for long that her crown was both shield and target. Yet now the danger no longer fell upon her alone. It stretched toward the man at her side. He sensed it as well, in the clipped tones of advisers, the guarded glances of commanders, the sudden silences when he entered rooms. His presence had altered the shape of her reign, and the enemies that once circled distantly now closed in with sharpened resolve. One evening, as they stood upon the balcony of their flagship, the stars pulsing faintly like watchful eyes, she broke the silence. They will not stop testing us. They will not rest until they have broken what we have built. Her hand tightened on the rail, her knuckles pale. He placed his hand over hers, steadying it. Then we give them reason to remember why we cannot be broken. She turned to him, studying his face, the lines carved deeper than when they first met, the scars that spoke of survival rather than defeat. Do you not grow weary of fighting? Every day, he admitted, with a wry smile. But growing weary isn't the same as giving up. You taught me that. Her gaze softened, though shadows lingered in her eyes. In that moment, she remembered the boy's vow, spoken with reckless certainty, and wondered if the man now beside her had ever doubted it. Their fears proved justified when news arrived of an uprising at the edge of their territories. A coalition of warlords, emboldened by distant powers, sought to fracture the fragile unity she had fought to sustain. Reports spoke of captured settlements, of her banners torn down and replaced with the symbols of rebellion. For her council, this was proof that the marriage had weakened her authority. For her enemies, it was an invitation to strike harder. Yet when she entered the council chamber, he walked beside her, not as a consort, not as an outsider tolerated for her sake, but as her equal. His presence ignited murmurs, but he met every doubtful "I" without faltering. She spoke of strategy, of mobilizing fleets and fortifying defenses. But when her voice grew hoarse, he rose. "I was not born among you," he said plainly, his words unadorned. "But I have bled beside you, and I have pledged myself to your queen. If you would call me an intruder, then so be it. But remember this, I did not come here to take, I came here to give. And I will give everything, my life, my blood, my will, to defend what we have built together." The room, heavy with skepticism, bent under the weight of his words. Some still turned away unmoved, but others, veterans who knew the measure of loyalty, leaders who had seen how easily hope could vanish, found themselves listening. When the council adjourned, the Queen stood with him in the quiet corridor outside. "You know you have marked yourself," she said softly. "They will see you not only as my consort, but as my sword. You will bear the brunt of their hatred." He smiled faintly. "Better me than you alone." The campaign that followed was not swift. It was drawn out, brutal, each skirmish testing the loyalty of her forces and the endurance of their bond. He led where he could, never above the men and women he commanded, always at their side. Word spread of the human who stood unyielding in battle, who carried the Queen's standard as though it were his own birthright. At first the tales were dismissed as embellishments, but the victories piled one upon the other, undeniable and hard-won. Yet war exacts a price. In the heat of one desperate siege, he was struck, the wound deep and cruel. He fell, and the soldiers feared the queen's resolve would collapse with him. But she came to his side, her hand pressing against his, her voice steady though her heart trembled. "You cannot leave me now," she whispered, fierce as command. "Not after everything. You swore you would marry me when you grew up, and you have. You swore to stand with me, and you have. Do not break the only vow that matters." Through the haze of pain, he forced his eyes open, and though his breath was ragged, he managed a faint laugh. "I wasn't planning to. Just needed a moment." He lived, though scarred again. And when the rebellion finally broke, when their enemies scattered and their banners once more flew unchallenged, the queen stood before her people with him at her side. Not as a symbol alone, but as a living truth, that together they had endured, and would endure still. In the aftermath, as silence returned to their halls and the echoes of war faded, they found themselves once more upon the balcony, the stars vast and indifferent above them. She leaned against him, the weight of her crown resting less heavily. "They will come again," she murmured. "Yes," he agreed. "And we will stand again. Always." The pendant still glowed faintly at his chest, and the ring still gleamed on her hand. Two small relics of promises made long ago, yet powerful enough to reshape destinies. And as the stars stretched on, endless and unknowable, they faced them not as queen and subject, not as sovereign and soldier, but as two souls bound by a vow neither time nor war could break. The quiet that followed the rebellion's defeat was deceptive. On the surface, the empire seemed united once more, markets thrived, the fleets returned to their stations, and the queen's banner hung unchallenged across every world under her dominion. Yet beneath the calm, a deeper unease stirred. Old rivalries had not vanished, only retreated into silence, and silence was never safe. The queen felt it in the way her counsel spoke, measured, cautious, like hunters circling prey. She saw it in the smiles of emissaries, too sharp at the edges to be sincere. And she heard it in the faint tremor of distant reports, unexplained disappearances at the borders, strange signals in the void, rumors of technologies far older than their empire itself. She had ruled long enough to know the difference between victory and reprieve, and this was no peace. It was an interlude before something greater. Her husband sensed it too, though differently. He noticed the soldiers who kept their hands close to their weapons even when no danger lurked. He saw the engineers fortifying ships with defenses not yet tested in battle. He heard the tone in the queen's voice when she spoke late at night, as though she were weighing words not yet ready for the council's ears. One evening, as they walked through the dimly lit archives, a place few visited, where records of ancient wars were stored in silence, he stopped before a mural etched into the wall. It showed a vast figure, neither human nor of her kind, striding across the stars with fire in its wake. Around it, lesser fleets burned, their banners indistinguishable. "What is this?" he asked quietly. Her expression hardened as she approached. "A warning," she replied, "from before even my reign. Some say it is myth, a tale to frighten children into obedience. But I have read the records. I have seen the fragments. This is no legend." He studied the mural more closely. "And you think it is stirring again?" Her silence was answer enough. In the weeks that followed, strange occurrences multiplied. Fleets patrolling the edges of known space vanished, without distress signals. Colonies awoke to skies filled with unfamiliar constellations, as though their worlds had shifted imperceptibly in the dark. And in the queen's private chambers, the pendant he wore began to pulse with a light stronger than ever before, as if responding to some unseen summons. One night, as he slept, the glow grew unbearable, searing against his skin. He woke with a cry, clutching it, and found the queen already by his side. The pendant no longer felt like a simple relic. It throbbed like a heart, alive and insistent. "This was never meant to be only a gift," she whispered, her eyes wide with something between fear and revelation. "It was a key. I should have known." "A key to what?" he asked, though dread had already begun to coil in his chest. Not what, she corrected, her voice trembling. Who? The days that followed blurred with preparations. Scouts sent into the void reported glimpses of structures larger than any known station, drifting in silence. Survivors of lost patrols spoke of weapons that unmade matter itself, erasing ships as if they had never existed. The Queen gathered her forces, but for the first time, she confessed uncertainty. These were not rebels or rival lords. This was something older, something that had been waiting. And always, the pendant called. It drew him toward the unknown, toward the places where space itself seemed thin and fragile. He resisted, fearing the truth it promised, but at last, he could no longer ignore it. With the Queen beside him, he stood before the council and demanded they listen. They are coming, he said, his voice echoing in the chamber. And they do not see us as enemies or allies. They see us as nothing at all. If we wait, if we pretend this is another rebellion or another warlord, we will be erased. The council erupted in protest, some calling him a fearmonger, others accusing him of undermining the Queen's authority. But when she rose, her voice silenced them. He speaks the truth. I have seen the signs. The enemy is real, and it does not care for our borders or our traditions. If we do not stand together, we will not stand at all. Reluctantly, the council bent to her will. Plans were made, fleets mobilized, alliances forged with factions once hostile. Yet beneath the movement, the Queen knew unity was fragile, and fear could unravel it at the first true test. That night, as she and her husband stood once more on the balcony, the stars felt closer than ever, pressing against the darkness like watchers impatient to descend. She turned to him, her hand resting lightly on the glowing pendant. This has always been our story, she said softly. A vow made, a bond forged, a kingdom defended. But now it may become something else. He met her gaze, steady despite the weight pressing on them both. Then we make sure it's not the story of how we ended, but of how we endured. Her lips curved into a faint, weary smile. You always did believe vows could shape destiny. And you, he said, drawing her closer, always proved me right. Above them, one star flickered unnaturally, its light pulsing in rhythm with the pendant's glow. Neither spoke, but both understood. Whatever was coming had already begun.